You spent years building something. Years planning, working, believing that this was it. This was your purpose. This was who you were meant to be. And then it collapsed. Not gradually, but completely. The career you dedicated yourself to fell apart. The relationship you built your identity around crumbled. The dream you chased with everything you had turned to dust. And now you're standing in the ruins of what used to be your life, asking one question: who am I without the things I built? Here is the truth that nobody tells you. That moment, that shattering moment when your dreams fall apart, that is not the end of your story. That is not punishment from God. That is actually the beginning of something far more real, far more beautiful, and far more powerful than anything you built with your own hands. Because when your dreams collapse, that is exactly when God begins to build something that cannot fall. See, we live in a culture that teaches us to build our identity on external things. Success, relationships, achievements, recognition. We are told that if we just work hard enough, believe in ourselves enough, we can become who we want to be. But there is a profound spiritual truth hidden in the wreckage of broken dreams. A truth that ancient prophets knew, that biblical heroes discovered, and that every person who has ever encountered God deeply has learned: your collapse is not your defeat. It is your redirection. The Bible is filled with stories of people who lost everything. And I do not mean people who failed and bounced back quickly. I mean people whose entire identity was stripped away. People who stood exactly where you stand right now, in the ruins, asking if God had abandoned them. But here is what happened in every single one of those stories. The moment they stopped trying to rebuild what they lost, the moment they stopped asking who they used to be, they finally discovered who they were meant to become. Your identity crisis is not a disaster. It is an invitation to meet yourself for the first time. When everything that defined you is gone, you finally get to ask the real question: who am I when nobody is watching? Who am I when there is no status to maintain, no image to project, no achievement to hide behind? This is what happened to Jacob in the Bible. Jacob built his entire identity on deception and manipulation. He was smart. He was cunning. He was the guy who could outsmart anyone. That was who Jacob was. Until he met God face to face. And in that encounter, everything changed. Jacob wrestled with God all night. And when morning came, Jacob was not the same man. His name changed from Jacob, which means deceiver, to Israel, which means Prince of God. His identity was not destroyed. It was reborn. But notice something crucial. That transformation did not happen when Jacob was winning. It did not happen when his plans were working out. It happened in the moment of complete vulnerability, in the moment when he had nothing left to rely on except God himself. The same pattern appears throughout Scripture. Samson was a man of extraordinary strength, but that strength was his entire identity. He became famous for his power. And then he lost it. In prison, blinded, broken, stripped of everything that made him Samson, he finally understood that his real strength was not in his muscles. It was in his connection to God. Your dreams collapsed because God is trying to show you something. You were building an identity on a foundation that was never meant to be permanent. And now you stand in the rubble asking who you really are. This is not tragedy. This is spiritual growth waiting to be discovered. The ruins of your old identity are the classroom where your real identity is born. But there is more to understand. Because when your identity collapses, something specific happens. Something that feels like weakness but is actually the birth of real strength. When your dreams collapse, anxiety comes with it. Suddenly, you do not know what comes next. You do not have the answer. You do not have the plan. And in that uncertainty, fear rises. But listen to what most people do with that fear. They try to eliminate it. They try to fix it. They scramble to rebuild, to create a new plan, a new identity, something solid to stand on so the anxiety will go away. But what if anxiety is not the enemy? What if it is actually the birth canal of real faith? Consider Joseph. His entire life was a series of collapses. His brothers betrayed him and sold him into slavery. Everything he knew was gone. But instead of becoming bitter, instead of trying to rebuild his old life, Joseph discovered something in that prison cell. He discovered that his worth was not tied to his circumstances. Years later, after being forgotten in prison, after being abandoned by the very people he helped, Joseph was finally released. And he made a statement that reveals everything. He said to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." He did not say, "I recovered." He said, "I discovered God in the ruins." Paul experienced this too. He was confident. He was successful. He was the man with the plan. And then he met Jesus, and everything changed. Paul lost his reputation, his status, his physical freedom. He was imprisoned. He was beaten. By every human measure, his life was a failure. But in that prison cell, Paul wrote some of the most powerful letters ever written. And he did not write them from a place of desperation. He wrote them from a place of absolute peace. He wrote, "I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do all this through Him who gives me strength." Your anxiety is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is a sign that you are finally ready to learn faith that is real. Faith that is not dependent on your circumstances. Faith that is built on something solid. That something is God Himself. Here is what this means for you right now. If you are living in anxiety because your plans fell apart, stop trying to fix it. Stop trying to rebuild quickly. Instead, ask yourself, what is God trying to teach me through this fear? What do I discover about myself when I stop running? And when you stop running, when you sit in that fear and finally listen, something unexpected happens. When your dreams collapse and your identity is shattered, something else happens. The noise stops. The constant validation you were seeking disappears. The people who were interested in you because of who you were start to fade away. And you are left in silence. Most people experience this silence as loneliness, as abandonment, as punishment. But Jesus understood something different about silence. Before every major moment in his life, before he healed, before he performed miracles, before he faced the cross, Jesus withdrew to lonely places to pray. Luke tells us this. Jesus went to the wilderness. Jesus went to the mountains. Jesus spent entire nights in prayer, alone. And he did not do this because he was avoiding something. He did this because he knew something that most of us forget. In the silence, God speaks. Not with words necessarily, but with presence, with clarity, with deep, undeniable truth. David knew this too. Before he was a king, before he had power and position, David hid in caves. He was hunted. He was afraid. He was completely alone. And in those caves, in that silence, David wrote the Psalms. The most honest, most vulnerable, most powerful prayers ever recorded. And he wrote them not from a place of victory. He wrote them from brokenness. Hannah experienced the same thing. She wanted a child, and she could not have one. In those years of silence, while everyone around her had what she wanted, while her own husband seemed to care more about his other wife, Hannah sat in the temple in silence. And in that silence, she prayed with such depth, such honesty, that her entire life transformed. But here is what all of them discovered. That silence was not empty. It was full. Full of God's presence. Full of truth. Full of transformation. When you stop trying to fill the silence with noise, when you stop trying to rebuild your old identity and your old dreams, when you sit in the rubble and simply allow yourself to be present with what is, something shifts. In that sacred space, God does not whisper. He rebuilds. Not the old you. The real you. Here is the invitation in your silence right now. If everything around you has gone quiet, if the noise has stopped and you find yourself alone with your thoughts, this is holy ground. This is not abandonment. This is preparation. Sit in it. Listen in it. Let God speak without competition. But the final piece of this transformation is perhaps the most powerful. Because your ruins are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of something eternal. Here is what nobody tells you about spiritual transformation. God does not waste anything. Not your pain. Not your failure. Not your collapsed dreams. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. His faith failed in the moment when it mattered most. He was ashamed. He was broken. He was convinced that his life was over. But Jesus did not discard Peter. Jesus rebuilt him. And the man who denied Jesus became the man who built the church. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. 40 years. He had been a prince of Egypt. He had power. He had position. And then he killed a man and had to run. For 40 years, he tended sheep in the desert. By every human measure, his life was wasted. But it was in that wilderness, in that exile, that God prepared him to lead 2 million people to freedom. Timothy was young and afraid. He had a gift, but he was terrified. Paul wrote to him, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Timothy was broken. Timothy was uncertain. But in his brokenness, God took everything that seemed like weakness and transformed it into strength. You see the pattern? The ruins of the old life are not garbage to be cleared away. They are the raw materials for something new. God does not say, forget what happened. He says, watch what I will build with these broken pieces. Every mistake you made, every plan that failed, every identity you lost, God can recycle it into purpose. Not wasted purpose. Not leftover purpose. But the kind of purpose that can only be built on a foundation of absolute surrender. Joseph said this clearly. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Not in spite of the harm, but through it. The very thing that was meant to destroy him became the foundation for his destiny. When you stand in the ruins of your collapsed dreams, you are not standing in a graveyard. You are standing in a construction site. And God is building something that cannot fall. So ask yourself this final question right now. What are you currently trying to rebuild that God wants to demolish? What identity are you clinging to that is meant to die so something real can be born? The answer to that question is the threshold. Cross it. So when your dreams collapse, when your identity is shattered, when you find yourself standing in the ruins asking who you are, do not mistake this season as punishment. This is not the end. This is the beginning of your real transformation. The anxiety you feel is not weakness. It is faith being born. The silence you are experiencing is not abandonment. It is invitation. The ruins around you are not a disaster. They are the scaffold where your real purpose is being built. God is not destroying you. He is reconstructing you. If you recognize yourself in this story, if your dreams have shattered and you are standing in ruins trying to figure out who you are anymore, you need to understand something vital about what God is building in this season. Come back. Because your story is not ending. It is just beginning to make sense. If this resonates with you, if you know that your collapse is actually your redirection, type in the comments, God is rebuilding. And remember this, everything you lost was preparation. Everything that broke was meant to break so you could finally become who you were meant to be. Your transformation is not behind you. It is right now. It is happening.